project or this fund sets aside $180 billion over a 12-year period. And as we know right now, there are at least 52,000 projects that have started or are underway. And I know you want to cut me off here, Madam Speaker. I look forward to continuing after.
You will have, the honourable member will have 3 minutes and 40 seconds to complete his speech. We are going now to statements by members. Déclaration des députés. Honourable.
Statements by members. The honourable member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Madam Speaker, today I rise in honour of the late Dr. Jim Smith, a beloved and accomplished family doctor, former Liberal member of the Legislative Assembly, and Cabinet Minister for the province of Nova Scotia, a husband, brother, father, and friend. For over 30 years, Dr. Smith was a cherished family doctor to many in Dartmouth Cole Harbour. And for around 2 decades, Dr. Jim Smith served as the MLA for Dartmouth East. His nonpartisan nature, strong work ethic, and compassion for others defined his political career and his life. When Dr. Jim Smith spoke, everyone listened. And it wasn't just because of his hilarious, sharp wit. His constituents knew they were well represented, and his political opponents knew it too. Madam Speaker, I ask that all members of this House rise and join folks from across my province in remembering and honouring Nova Scotia's faithful servant, Dr. Jim Smith.
The honourable member for York Simcoe.
Madam Speaker, I am honoured to rise once again and represent the great communities of Bradford, East Gwillimbury, Georgina, King, and the Chippewas of Georgina Island as Member of Parliament for York Simcoe. My constituents had sent me to Ottawa with one clear message. This federal government is not working for them. Rural communities are being left behind. They have limited or non-existing broadband internet. They are faced with outrageous costs just to heat their homes. Small businesses are struggling. There's no affordable housing to be found, and environmental projects like the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund remain unfunded. This government's out-of-control spending has led to billions of dollars in deficits, but communities like mine have nothing to show for it. Under the Liberals, Canada is boring just to keep the lights on, because clearly vital projects like roads and hospitals just aren't being built. People are tired of politicians who just keep kicking the can down the road. I will stand up to this government and fight for my community and the people who call us home.
The honourable member for Humber River Black Creek.
As the Member of Parliament for Humber River Black Creek, a community with a large Vietnamese population, I'd like to rise today to bring to the attention the detainment of Mr. Chow Van Cam, an Australian citizen and a retiree detained by Vietnamese authorities. Mr. Cho is a member of the Viet Thanh organization, a group recognized by the United Nations as a peaceful group advocating for democratic reform. In January, Cho was in Saigon conducting research on human rights violations when he was detained. On November 11, 2019, Cho was sentenced to 12 years in prison for what authorities describe as attempts to overthrow the state. At 70 years old, many are concerned about Mr. Cho's health, which has already declined since his arrest. As a long-standing advocate for human rights, I want to call attention to the abuses and violations occurring against Mr. Chow Van Cam and denounce the actions of Vietnamese authorities against him and to further support the Viet Thanh organization's request for his immediate release. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I would like to underscore the passing away of a major Quebec Union leader, Fernand Daou, who passed away last Thursday at the age of 93. He spent 40 years within the FTQ defending workers who were his cause. He fought for a modern Quebec. As a key union leader, he made a major contribution to social and economic development. He was an ardent defender of Quebec's interests. He was named Patriot of the Year in 1998. He was awarded Knight of the Ordre National de Québec in 2001, and he received an honor of the Order of Francophones d'Amérique in 1994. He was a passionate man who remained dedicated to the defense and the promotion of the French language. He was one of the artisans of French language in the workplace, and our sincere condolences go to his family and loved ones. Our thoughts are with the entire FTQ family.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sport has an incredible ability to bring us together, whether locally in our communities or as a nation watching our athletes represent Canada on the world stage. This holiday season was no exception to that rule, as we watched our top hockey athletes compete in 3 different international tournaments. Hockey Canada sent teams to the World Junior Hockey Championship in Czech Republic, the Spangler Cup in Switzerland, and the World Women's Under-18 Championships in Slovakia. In all 3 tournaments, Canada made the final and earned a gold medal at the World Junior Championship and Spangler Cup, while garnering a hard-fought silver medal at the World Women's Under-18. I would like to highlight 3 Nova Scotians who played key roles as part of the Canadian contingent. Jared McIsaac of Truro won gold with the World Junior team, while Antigonish native Alex Grant and Judic's Andrew McDonald helped Canada to gold at the historic Spangler Cup. I would ask that all members of this House join me in congratulating our athletes that represented Canada so well on the international stage.
Honourable member for Kildonan, St. Paul.
I'm honored to deliver my first member statement, and I'm pleased to take this opportunity to acknowledge the 50th anniversary of Donwood Manor Personal Care Home, an important institution serving seniors in the North Kildonan neighbourhood of my riding. Donwood first opened its doors in 1970 and was founded by members of 8 Mennonite Brethren churches in Winnipeg. The founders recognized the need in the community for subsidized, quality Christian care of seniors and came together to create this incredible organization. Each time I visit Donwood, I'm in awe of the compassion and grace in the quality of care Donwood provides to seniors. It is a place that enables the elderly to transition from their homes to a caring community and to age with dignity and grace. I would like to acknowledge the dedicated work of Nina Laboon, CEO of Donwood Manor, Board Chair John Jansen, and Brian Lowen, Chair of the Donwood Manor Foundation, and the dedicated staff and the volunteers. Congratulations to Donwood Manor. It is my honor to formally recognize them in the House of Commons today.
The honourable member for Miramichi, Grand Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my community of Rogersville, you can find Femme Forte, strong women. 2 years ago, feedback from a new widow really moved a city employee. The widow said that since she lost her spouse, she felt powerless and useless and realized how much she depended on her husband for traditionally male activities, such as mechanics and carpentry. This employee, Angèle McKay, approached the city council with her project Femme Forte, or Strong Women, and she incorporated suggestions made during a meeting, and more than 30 workshops were organized, from self-defense, woodshop, mechanics, anxiety, fitness, and gardening. Please note, Mr. Speaker, that if you drop by my community of Rogersville, you'll certainly find Femme Forte, such strong women. Thank you.
For Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak on an issue that is of top importance to Davenport residents, and that is education. Over the last couple of months, there have been rotating strikes in Ontario, and this labour dispute is having a negative impact on our children and their education. Education contracts expired in August 2019, and teachers' unions have not been able to reach an agreement with the Ontario government over their wages and the future of education in our province. Teachers have legitimate concerns about the future of education in terms of class size, online courses, and proposed cuts within the system. Parents are equally concerned about the impact of the strike on their kids, including missed learning days, in addition to the future of education in Ontario. I want to encourage the Ontario government and the Minister of Education to immediately return to the bargaining table to address these issues and to bargain in good faith. The future of all Ontario students and their education depends on it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, Neil Peart died a few short weeks ago, but he left a legacy of music on a nation and world of fans who revel in the challenge of air drumming to the best of Rush. For 40 years, Neil Peart had us lost in the lyrics that would bring images of the limelight being caught up in the spirit of radio and the life and conflict of the subdivisions. Peart's lyrical adventure led us away from his world-renowned drum kit to motoring on highways and back roads. He rode his motorbike as a healing highway for his loss and pain, which he wrote about, taking us along for the ride. Neil Peart's legacy is more than one of books, albums, or hundreds of performances. Though he lived a private life, he shared his heartache and exhilarated us with his performances. Mr. Speaker, with every beat of his drum, with every lyric he wrote, with every story he told, Neil Peart will forever and always be closer to the hearts of Canadians. May he rest in peace, and may God bless his family and friends.
The Honourable Member for Argenteuil-la-Petite-Nation.
Member for Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, despite being a veteran infantry officer fully trained on a number of prohibited and restricted firearms, I am required by law to complete both the Canadian Firearm Safety Course and the Canadian Restricted Firearm Safety Course should I want to own a restricted firearm. I successfully completed both courses over the last few weeks. These courses are integral to knowing about firearm safety and to ensuring Canadians safely store and use firearms. It'd also be incredibly valuable to any member in the House drafting firearms legislation. I trust that all members working on this legislation have taken or will take these courses, including the Minister of Public Safety. My home riding of Bruce Grey Owen Sound, hunting, farming, and sport shooting are a way of life. I've been hearing from many of my constituents that they are deeply concerned about the proposed Liberal firearms legislation via an order in Council without any debate in this House. Forcing law-abiding Canadians to follow even more laws will not reduce urban crime and fails to address the real problems of gang, illegal smuggling, drugs, and poverty. As a newly elected MP, I'm here to solve problems, not create new ones.
Well, member for Stevesman, Richmond East.
Celebrating the Lunar New Year, a celebration of family and togetherness, making good fortune during this year of the rat. I would like to extend these wishes of health and prosperity to all. However, during this time, we must also take a moment to remember and honor the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. In 2014, I visited the place of unimaginable suffering, and I'm still affected by this experience. Mr. Speaker, I mourn the victims of this tragedy and encourage Canadians to be conscious of other human beings' abuses, other human rights abuses taking place globally. In Canada, we are safe, free to celebrate the diversity of our cultures, our faiths, and appreciate our differences. Many abroad are unable to do so, and it is our duty to serve as the global example of multiculturalism. In this time of celebration and remembrance, I encourage others to be conscious of such simple freedoms as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
The desperation I felt when I couldn't get my little guy into quality, affordable, licensed childcare space. It's no joke. The wait lists were so long that I wasn't offered a space until he was 8. Yet this is the reality for so many working families. We know investing in childcare is good for the child, for the family, and our economy. Every dollar invested in childcare is returned threefold in the economy. For decades, the Liberals have made endless promises on childcare programs, yet we have seen little real action, let alone a quality, universal, affordable, accessible system. In this new minority parliament, words are not good enough. Budget 2020 needs to have significant increase in investments to at least $1 billion annually so that families with children under 5 and elementary school age children who need before and after school care can access them. Federal investments can build on what the BC government has done based on their $10 a day model, saving families upwards of $1,000 a month. No more pretty words. It's time for action.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, I would like to honour the memory of Roger Nicolet, a renowned engineer and great contributor to Quebec public life. He was responsible for key projects such as the Pyramid at the Louvre, the CN Tower, and Montreal's Olympic Village. He worked tirelessly for the city as mayor of Austin for 33 years. He was a representative of the MRC and president of the Quebec Federation of Municipalities. We also remember his commitment to Quebec, notably as a member of the Bélanger-Campeau Historical Commission. He chaired public safety commissions for issues that marked Quebec, such as the ice storm and the Saguenay floods. His commitment won him many awards, particularly the Officer of the Order of Quebec Award. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I offer my condolences to his family and loved ones. Roger Nicolet was a man of talent and generosity whose memory we honor.
For Foothills. This fall's harvest has been extremely difficult for Canadian farmers, and the Liberals made it worse. Liberal political blunders have cost Canadian farmers vital trade markets, and they added to that burden by implementing a devastating carbon tax. This fall, farmers had to dry their grain, and the carbon tax cost them billions of dollars, money they do not have. And yet the Agriculture Minister still says she doesn't know how the carbon tax will impact farmers. Through an order paper question, I asked the Minister about an exemption for Canadian farmers from the carbon tax. In her response, she admitted she and her department, and I quote, do not have information concerning the administration of the federal carbon tax. Ooh. How can the Liberals implement a crippling carbon tax on Canadian agriculture without having any clue how it will impact hardworking farm families? Hear, hear. The Liberals must stop ignoring the data, give Canadian farmers credit for their conservation efforts, and immediately exempt Canadian agriculture from the Liberals' crippling carbon tax.
The honourable member for St. John Rothsay.
I am thrilled to rise for the first time in the 43rd Parliament to thank the wonderful people of St. John Rothsay and my incredible campaign volunteers for giving me a second mandate to stand up for them in this place. Since being re-elected, I've hit the ground running. I have worked to deliver nearly $8 million in new federal funding for our riding. Last week, this began paying off. I was thrilled to announce our federal government's investment of $750,000 through ACOA to help UNB St. John relocate its MBA program to St. John's Uptown Core. This significant federal investment in our riding will allow our community to fully leverage its entrepreneurial hub and its world-class university in order to unlock its full economic potential. This, Mr. Speaker, is only the beginning. I'm excited to continue delivering the unprecedented federal investments our riding needs by always putting it first here in Ottawa. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before going to oral questions, while I have your attention, I just wanted to remind the honourable members that the SO31s are limited to 60 seconds. I noticed a few of them going 5 seconds over and as much as 8 seconds over. It makes it difficult to stay within the parameters, so I just want to remind everyone to keep it within the 60 seconds. I wouldn't want to cut anybody off by standing and then cutting off their mic. Oral questions. Question orale, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, under this Prime Minister, we have the worst of both worlds. We have the sky-high deficits that he promised, but we don't have the infrastructure spending that was supposed to go along with it. In fact, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has said that the infrastructure plan, quote, does not exist. Instead of spending their hard-earned money on things that will actually grow the economy, all Canadians have instead is reckless borrowing, wasteful spending, and sky-high taxes to pay for it all. If the Prime Minister is so sure about his infrastructure plan, will he support our calls to call in the Auditor General?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
5 years ago, we made a commitment to Canadians to do things differently from the Conservatives who'd underinvested in infrastructure for 10 years. We made historic investments in infrastructure to grow the economy and to improve Canadians' quality of life, while Conservatives campaigned on billions of dollars worth of cuts for much-needed infrastructure across the country. Our plan has over 4,800 projects underway or completed, 4 times the number of the Conservatives in their last 4-year mandate. We're building affordable housing, community centres, libraries and bridges. We're investing in Canada's future.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he is doing something different than the previous Conservative government. We got projects built. We balanced the budget. And we cut taxes for Canadians all along the way. Instead, for every $100 that this Liberal government is spending on infrastructure, only $3 is actually going to projects for trade and transportation, all the while racking up billions of dollars in new debt. In fact, this year alone, $25 billion worth of taxpayers' money will have to go just to pay the interest on that debt. So once again, will the Prime Minister support our calls to bring in the Auditor General?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Many Canadians remember with regret the Conservatives' infrastructure plan that features things like billboards and doorknobs and, yes, gazebos. We will continue to invest in the things that Canadians need with a historic $40 billion national housing strategy, investing in transit, investing the kinds of things that keep our economy moving and keep Canadians growing towards a better future.
Well, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Match our record of opening up ports and bridges and increasing trade capacity against this Prime Minister's temporary hockey rinks and spending money on the Asian Infrastructure Bank building projects in other countries. Le Premier Ministre a promis que son
The Prime Minister promised that his infrastructure plan would increase GDP, but the Parliamentary Budget Officer has shown that there will be no impact on GDP. Will the Prime Minister support our motion to have the Auditor General conduct an audit on its infrastructure program? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Well, indeed, we made a very different choice than the Conservatives did. We chose to invest in communities, to invest in infrastructure that makes a difference in people's lives, rather than opting for the cuts and austerity that the Conservatives are still promoting, even after 2 electoral defeats. We know that investing in our communities leaves more money in the pockets of Canadians. That's how we created over 1 million new jobs and lifted almost 1 million people out of poverty. Those are the investments that we will continue to make. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, the crisis created by the coronavirus has made it clearer than ever that cooperation amongst all governments around the globe is important to ensuring public health.
You're here.
Will the Prime Minister support observer status in the World Health Organization for Taiwan?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we continue to work with the WHO. We continue to work with allied countries around the world, to ensure that we're dealing with this health challenge. I can reassure Canadians that the risks to Canadians are low. And in regards to Canadians in China, we're engaged in consular support for them. We will continue to make sure that Canadians remain safe amid these concerns about public health.
You're right. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That was a very simple question. There's been a request made by the government in Taiwan to be an observer at the WHO, especially during this time. This is a decision that the Prime Minister can make whether or not to support Taiwan's request. It's a yes or no question. Will the Prime Minister support observer status for Taiwan at the WHO?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We're a country that is always engaged in supporting multilateralism, whether it's supporting the United Nations, whether it's supporting the WHO, supporting collaboration between countries around the world. We will continue to work together on addressing this public health emergency. We recognize that the Conservatives like to play politics with international affairs. We're focused on keeping Canadians safe.
Exactly. Well, Before going to the next question, I was having technical trouble with the speakers because I couldn't hear the answers, but I'm starting to have the trouble again. So I just want to remind everyone that maybe it wasn't the speakers, it's the noise within the chamber. So I want to ask everyone to keep the noise down so we can hear each other. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The aluminum sector is the second most important export sector in Quebec. Aluminum represents no less than 30,000 jobs in Quebec. Aluminum can come into our country freely from Mexico without any protection. I presume that the government conducted impact assessment studies of the new NAFTA so that they could look at the consequences that it would have on aluminum in Quebec. Can the Prime Minister confirm that such impact assessment studies exist, and can he make them public? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's very simple. Under the old trade agreement, there was no guarantee for aluminum workers in North America or any standards about how much North American aluminum had to be manufactured, had to be used in automobile manufacturing. We can now say that there's a 70% guarantee for North American aluminum being used in building cars. And because most aluminum is produced in Quebec, that's very good news for aluminum workers in Quebec and all across Canada. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, you can't confuse the component parts and the metal that is used to make them. When the new NAFTA was signed, Quebec was producing more aluminum than China, but today China produces 15 times more. There were 5 projects to expand and modernize Quebec aluminum factories at the time. Can the Prime Minister prove that there will be no negative impact here and confirm that those 5 projects will go forward? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of the innovation happening in Quebec's aluminum sector. I saw AP60 and the Elysis project. We know that there's a lot of good news coming for our aluminum workers, and we will always support them, just as we supported them by getting rid of the unfair tariffs that were imposed by the U.S. But don't take my word for it. You can listen to Jean Simard, the president of the Aluminum Association of Canada, who said, "We believe that the new NAFTA is the right path."
Member for Burnaby South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In 2016, we learned that Volkswagen's vehicles were emitting illegal levels of toxins that are hurting people and the environment. Yet the Liberal government did nothing for 3 years. When they finally decided to act, they gave a foreign company that makes no contribution to our Canadian workforce a sweetheart deal, left them off the hook with no criminal charges. Volkswagen savait que leur voiture.
Volkswagen knew that their vehicles didn't meet our human health and environmental standards. So why are the Liberals putting the interests of a foreign company over the interests of people and the environment? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we take our responsibility to fight for a better environment very seriously. That's why we're pleased that Volkswagen did face consequences for the way that they misled Canadians. It's important to ensure that in Canada we maintain the highest possible standards and that we fight climate change. We will continue to lead the charge in this respect because we know that our jobs and the future of our children and our planet is at stake. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. A foreign company is now facing no criminal charges for this behavior. That's unacceptable. Yesterday, the minister was bragging about the fact that the Liberal government uses external assistance for our public services. Giving $12 billion in contracts to foreign companies is not a solution.
Contributed to the tripling of outsourcing of public service work. That's tripling public money that goes to large international corporations. Outsourcing hurts our Canadian workforce. So why is the Liberal government favoring large international corporations over Canadian workers?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Focused over the past 5 years on growing the Canadian economy by creating new jobs and by encouraging Canadians to create new jobs. And we've seen success in over 1 million new jobs created over the past 5 years. Lowest poverty rates in a long time. We've decreased poverty by significant percentages and lifted over almost 1 million people out of poverty. We recognize that when it comes to procurement, there's always an important balance to be made between making sure we're making responsible use of taxpayer money while at the same time we're creating good jobs, and we're always focused on getting that balance right.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, in July, the expert science-based review said Teck's Frontier Mine should be approved. All local Indigenous communities support it. Yesterday, the Environment Minister said the Liberals might reject it. Today, he said they might delay it. Death by delay is a tactic of anti-energy activists. If approved, Frontier would immediately create 7,000 much-needed jobs in Alberta and show the world that Canada is open for business. Can the Prime Minister name a single project outside of the oil and gas sector that his cabinet rejected based on emissions?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians elected this government to protect the environment and to grow the economy, to advance reconciliation and to create good jobs. They also expect this government to oversee fair and thorough environmental assessment processes. This is a major project that is being reviewed under the 2012 environmental assessment process. Under that process, the Cabinet must make a decision by the end of February, and we will do so.
Here, here. Honourable Member for Lakeland.
The answer to my question was no. In fact, the Liberals have turned a blind eye to major emissions from projects in other sectors and even in oil and gas and other projects on foreign oil and on pipelines in China. Now, the Prime Minister said, quote, he heard the message from Albertans. Well, Premier Kenney made it easy with a 5-point list, including the quick approval of Teck's Frontier Mine. Oil sands are a world leader in emissions reductions, and they create jobs in every single province. Alberta needs them now. So will the Prime Minister approve Teck's Frontier Mine?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, the oil and gas sector, as many other sectors, are very important to the Canadian economy, but Canadians expect that when you're reviewing major projects of any type that you do in an environmental assessment process, look at the environmental impacts. That is what we are doing. We are following the process that was actually put in place by the previous government in 2012. We will review that. We will be making a decision by the end of February.
The Honourable Member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Yesterday, Reg and Sherry Renner from Langley reached out for help. Their daughter Lauren, her husband, and 2-year-old child live and work in Wuhan, which is currently on lockdown, and Lauren's 8 months pregnant. Due to the ban on all public and private traffic in the city, she's unable to travel freely to the hospital should she go into labor. Being a grandmother myself, I understand the real urgency of the situation. So what's the government's plan to ensure the safety of Lauren and her unborn child?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
I'd like to thank the member for bringing this matter to our attention. We take, obviously, the safety and security of every Canadian abroad very seriously. Canadian officials in Ottawa and in China are working closely with their Chinese counterparts to address the situation in the affected area in light of the recent events. Canada continues to liaise closely with our international partner to develop options, and at 4 o'clock, Mr. Speaker, we'll hold a press conference where we'll explain to Canadians what measures we're going to take care and offer consular services to Canadian and China.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverbend.
Mr. Speaker, there's no excuse why they can't share that information right here in the House. We shouldn't have to wait outside in the press conference to hear that information. Because just today, we've heard that the minister from the other side of the wave, and the health minister, told that Canadians that the first individual identified with the coronavirus didn't self-identify when entering Canada. On Monday, we learned that the individual did tell the CBSA officer he'd been to Wuhan and did have a cough. There's no question that this raises concern between CBSA and health officials when China has seen a 65% increase in reported cases in just one day. How can Canadians be sure that the current screening measures are working?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Speaker, in fact, the individual that the member opposite is referring to took exactly the appropriate precautions that were that he was given at the border. So, for example, he returned to his home. He began to exhibit symptoms. He phoned for emergency help. He let the emergency responders know that he had recently traveled to Wuhan. They arrived in protective gear. They alerted the hospital to which he was being transported. The appropriate infection protections were taken. He was isolated. Mr. Speaker, this gives me confidence that, in fact, the system is working very well together.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, the impact of the coronavirus is growing. 25 people are currently under observation, and we know that the virus is spreading faster than originally thought. The number of people infected has increased by 65%. We also know that the first 2 cases detected in Canada came from passengers on flight CZ311, which had hundreds of people on board. Mr. Speaker, does the government know where all of those passengers are right now? Honourable Minister of Health.
because of the collaboration that I mentioned earlier, my colleagues in Ontario and all across the province have been working extremely well to share information. In the case that he references, we immediately provided the airplane manifest, which allowed the contact tracing to begin. In fact, Ontario has been contacting the passengers that may have been infected, and it's done so exceedingly well. I have every confidence that my colleagues across the province and territories are taking their responsibilities as seriously as we are, and I want to thank them for doing so.
Honorable Député de Richmond.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthur-Besca. Mr. Speaker, over 168 Canadians are currently in quarantine zones in China. The U.S., France, South Korea, Germany, and Morocco have already confirmed that they will be repatriating their citizens. Can the Prime Minister tell us exactly what is being done to protect Canadians in China and to provide appropriate consular services? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. I want to thank my colleague for his question. Obviously, the health and safety of Canadians around the world is our top priority. I can inform my colleague that as of yesterday, according to the latest numbers, 250 Canadians are registered in that region, which will allow us to provide them with up-to-date information. We have 126 Canadians who have used our consular services so far. We are working with our allies to consider options, and we will be providing all consular assistance that Canadians may need. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, how can the regions of Quebec trust a government that is ready to sacrifice the whole region of Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, the North Shore? The Prime Minister was saying, oh, yes, but, people in the industry are very happy. Well, sure, he invites people from industry to use coal and to pay them less money, even though this aluminum doesn't come from Quebec. The Prime Minister said, we're ready to work with you. I told them that we had a proposal for them. Will you listen? Well, the Deputy Prime Minister talked to me about the Premier of Quebec and all kinds of other things. So I'm going to ask the question again. We have a proposal for you. Will you be open to it? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Of course, yes. I'm always open to listen to any proposal from any member in this House. The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, aluminum is crucial for the regions of Quebec and Quebec as a whole. It's important to Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. I could mention Deschambault in the capital region, Bécancour in central Quebec. The North Shore with Alcoa and Alouette, which is the biggest aluminum factory not only in Canada, but in North America. This is a huge industry that is now being undermined by a trade deal that the Bloc Québécois is being asked to support without protest. And this is on top of the sacrifices made to the supply management system. Does the government realize the price that the regions of Quebec are having to pay? The Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the new version of NAFTA has significant advantages for Quebec. It preserves $57.3 billion in exports from Quebec to the U.S. It also preserves the cultural exception, which is a very important aspect of the deal for our government. And we preserved supply management when the United States tried to fully dismantle it. So this is a good agreement for Quebec and for Canada. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we know that in 2017, a number of parole officers sent a letter to the Prime Minister warning him about possible consequences of changing the appointment process for parole officers, but they got no response. Experienced officers' terms were not renewed, and many of them were replaced by new people with less experience. Why did no one follow up on this important letter?
The Minister of Public Safety.
We worked very hard to implement a merit-based system for the appointment of people to these important board positions. And upon appointment, all board members complete an intensive 5-week board member orientation session wherein they receive training on relevant law, policy, and risk assessment. This is followed up by ongoing mentoring and coaching by the regional vice chair. And Mr. Speaker, no board member is assigned any decision-making responsibilities until they have fully completed their training and have the confidence of the regional vice chair. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we know that this is a very delicate case, but This is a serious situation and we need answers. The minister yesterday said that there would be an internal investigation, but that's not good enough. Given the situation, it's possible that other criminals may be on parole in the same situation, and this is an issue of women's safety. Currently, we have officials investigating other officials, and that's not good enough. Will the government authorize an external investigation?
Public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I take the opportunity to express all of our collective condolences and sympathy to the families of friends of the deceased in this tragic case. Mr. Speaker, public safety is our main consideration, will always be in parole decisions. And the parole board makes these decisions based on long-standing criteria established to promote safe and effective reintegration into society of all offenders in this case. We share the concerns of Canadians, and we've asked the chair of the parole board and the Commissioner of Correction Services to conduct a thorough investigation and review so that we can make decisions based on facts. That's what we'll do, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, the member from Thunder Bay Rainy River raised concerns from his constituents on the proposed Liberal gun ban. These concerns include that so-called military-style assault rifles are already banned and have been for decades. The policy focuses on style, not the function of firearms, and law-abiding hunters and sport shooters fear losing their guns arbitrarily. This program will be costly and have no impact on crime, and the entire process bypasses debate and democracy. Mr. Speaker, will the minister listen to Canadians and the evidence and cancel this misguided policy?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Speaker, we have listened very clearly to Canadians, and we are going to eliminate the presence of weapons that were designed to kill people from our society. But, Mr. Speaker, that's not all we're going to do. We're going to strengthen the law with respect to securing our borders. We're going to strengthen our laws to prevent the theft of handguns that get into the hands of criminals. And we're going to strengthen our laws to deter criminal diversion of handguns. We're investing in law enforcement and giving them the tools they need to keep our community safe. And we're investing in kids and communities so that they can make better decisions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Medicine Hat Carson.
Mr. Speaker, I can't believe the load we just heard. Canadians have been very, very clear. They want action on crime, they want action on gangs, and they want action on illegal firearms, and they want it now. Mr. Speaker, this was confirmed by the letter from the member from Thunder Bay Rainy River when he actually wrote to the Minister of Public Safety, wherein his constituents objected to the misguided Liberal plan to ban firearms and that focuses on law-abiding Canadians and not on criminals. The member urged the minister to take their constituents' advice and follow it. Will the minister listen to constituents, to his own colleague, and stop this misguided Liberal confiscation?
I just want to remind the honourable members that insinuating something doesn't really say a word that we can't say in the House, but I just want to remind the honourable members to use some caution and some judgment. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, for decades, the police chiefs in this country have been asking successive governments to take firm action to remove military-style weapons from our society. Mr. Speaker, we've listened. We've also heard from law enforcement that they needed investment in tools and resources in order to deal effectively with the gangs. And we have undertaken to strengthen gun control laws. We've looked at the ways in which guns get into the hands of criminals. It's across the border, it's through theft, and it's through diversion. Mr. Speaker, we'll strengthen our laws to keep our communities safe.
Starting to have a hard time hearing the answers again. I just want to remind the honourable members when an answer is coming up or a question's being asked, please respect the other side, whichever side it is, and listen in. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Highest poverty rate in the country. In Canada, over 1 million children live in poverty. The Liberals promise one thing, but do the opposite. They could end child poverty today, but they choose not to. Instead of financing their corporate buddies and letting the ultra-rich off the hook, they could invest in pharmacare, childcare, and a $15 minimum wage. Campaign 2000 shows that these are the solutions. Are the Liberals planning to act to end child poverty, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the really important question. As a government, we released the first ever national anti-poverty strategy. We introduced the Canada Child Benefit that is delivering more money to 9 out of 10 families. We've introduced the first ever Canada Housing Benefit, which will make a real difference in the lives of families and enable families to be able to take that rental supplement and make it portable and help children along the way. We are dedicated to also meeting our commitment to introduce an additional 250,000 before and after school childcare spaces.
The member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Liberals are taking from the poor and giving to the rich. They've got Robin Hood backwards, Mr. Speaker. Now, today the PBO released a report on the Liberals' $6.9 billion tax plan. And guess who benefits most? The wealthiest 10%. That's why we put together a better plan that also gives dental care to 4.5 million Canadians.
Instead of giving away billions to the wealthiest, will the Liberals work with us to set up a dental care system for those who need it? The Honourable Minister of Finance.
The question. It's important for us to look at how we can have the broadest impact on Canadians, and that's why we put in place a tax plan that's going to significantly make a difference for millions of Canadians. Yesterday in this House, I said that it would help 9 million. In fact, I went back to my office. It's actually 20 million Canadians that will be paying lower taxes as a result of our tax changes. And yes, it will be means tested so that the wealthiest will not get the tax advantage. So it will help those people that are most in need of help, and that's important for the future of our country.
Honourable member for Avalon.
Mr. Speaker, Newfoundland and Labrador recently experienced a record-setting and unprecedented blizzard that left parts of the province covered in up to 94 centimetres of snow, thousands without power and stuck inside their homes. Can the Minister of Public Safety please update the House on the steps taken by our government to assist and support Newfoundlanders during their time of need?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Speaker, as Canadians, we stand together in a time of need. Before, during, and after the storm, we were in constant contact with Premier Ball and Minister Bragg, and together we collaborated to immediately mobilize their request for assistance. Mr. Speaker, over 400 members of the Canadian Armed Forces and the Reserves were warmly welcomed by the people of Newfoundland, and they helped clear snow and attended to the elderly and sick to ensure that those who needed help received it. On behalf of all Canadians, I'd like to commend the resilience of the people of Newfoundland and to acknowledge the outstanding efforts of all first responders. And in particular, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say thanks to the Canadian Armed Forces and our Reserves for answering the call to service.
Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, Vice Admiral Mark Norman has been cleared, and it's time for these Liberals to explain why they spent $1.4 million taxpayer dollars on their malicious political prosecution of an innocent Navy officer. The Liberals obstructed justice, used code words, and refused to turn over evidence. The Prime Minister twice said publicly that Norman would be put on trial even before charges were laid. Meanwhile, our military's dangerously unreliable 75-year-old pistols need to be replaced. How many new pistols could have been bought for our troops using these unnecessary legal fees?
Minister of Defense.
Mr. Speaker, we are committed to making sure the Canadian Armed Forces have all the tools necessary, and our defense policy is fully funded and making sure that our women and men get the equipment that they need. The government and the Vice Admiral Norman reached a mutually acceptable agreement, the details of which remain confidential. After consulting with his family, Vice Admiral Norman retired from the Canadian Armed Service, and I want to thank him for his long service of 38 years of dedicated service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, this government has failed to recognize the softwood lumber crisis in British Columbia. Over 24 mills have closed down, and forestry-dependent communities are losing their primary industries. Yet, Western diversification, the money into British Columbia, has primarily gone to the thriving cities of Victoria and Vancouver. There have been crumbs to the communities that need it the most. Will the Minister for WED commit to supporting these desperate communities in Budget 2020?
Full Minister for Economic Development.
Of course, we understand that certain times some people across the country and in BC feel anxiety towards economic downturns, and we understand that the growth that we've seen across the country has not necessarily been equally reallocated. And so, therefore, therefore, of course, we want to work with WD to make sure that people in BC and across the West know that we've got their back, and that's exactly what we'll be doing, my team and I, on this. Thank you.
Well, member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, the government recently fired a public service employee who oversaw anti-racism initiatives for speaking out against the Prime Minister for wearing blackface. She was just doing her job. Now we received documents that outline, quote, duty of loyalty training for the Department of Heritage. Wow. While that sounds Orwellian enough, it goes on to note that failure to observe the duty of loyalty may lead to disciplinary action, including dismissal. Mr. Speaker, why does the Prime Minister need our nonpartisan professional public service to profess absolute and total loyalty to him?
Just like it's
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The most important duty that the government and parliamentarians have is to serve Canadians to the best of their abilities. That's what we expect also from the public service, which is a professional service, the highest world standards we expect from public servants, the service that they need to give to Canadians with the expectations and the requirements that go with that level of service.
Member for Banff Airdrie.
For all their talk about reconciliation, the Liberals are shutting First Nation students in my riding out of their school. Exshaw School is home to nearly 200 First Nation students. The Liberals have terminated a 47-year-old agreement and cut funding for the students. The school is left with an insurmountable $1.6 million shortfall and will be forced to close their doors if Indigenous Services Canada continues to refuse to work towards a solution. Typical Liberal lip service won't do. Why are they shutting the door on Indigenous students and the school that they've chosen to attend?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, to put it clearly, no First Nation child will go without funding. This is about advancing First Nations control of First Nations education. Stoney Nakoda and the Stoney Education Authority expressed an interest in taking over the administration of their own funding agreement with the Canadian Rockies Public Schools Division from my department, and we did so. Funding will continue to be provided by my department to the schools based on actual costs of educational programming until a new Education 2 agreement is negotiated and finalized with the First Nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois and the NDP held a press conference to talk about the labour dispute at Swissport. And this dispute highlights two major shortcomings of the Canada Labour Code. Over 40 years after Quebec did it, it's time for the federal government to ban strikebreakers. Workers should also be protected when contracts are transferred. When a contract is taken over, people lose their jobs and they get hired back under worse working conditions. Will the minister finally bring the code into the 21st century by banning scabs? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's the first time I'm rising in this session, so I'd like to thank the good people of Hamilton West, Ancaster, Dundas for re-electing me and giving me the honour to serve. Monsieur le Président, je remercie.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. We have begun consulting already.
I've actually spoken with one of my opposition critics and Labour leaders with respect to the issue of contract flipping or retendering. We know that this is a complex topic. We have consulted, and I will continue to be consulting with all those that will be impacted to find a solution that meets the needs of both employers and employees. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Avignon-Lamétis-Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, community-based organizations and smaller municipalities are concerned about delays with the federal summer jobs program. These subsidies to student hiring often make all the difference for organizations with limited means. It's also a great opportunity for young people all over Quebec. People all over Quebec are worried that delay could prevent them from taking advantage of this program. My question is simple, Mr. Speaker. When will the government finally open the funding application period? And two, will the deadline be extended to make up for the delay? The Honourable Minister.
For the question.
question. Mr. Speaker, we recognize how valuable Canada Summer Jobs is to employers, to community organizations, and indeed to young people across this country. We're really excited that we doubled the number of opportunities for young people 3 years ago, and we're continuing on with that commitment. I can assure the member opposite that we'll be very, very soon releasing the detail of the application process and look forward to 70,000 students this summer getting benefits from it. Thank you.
Honourable member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, the United States is Canada's most important trading partner, with trade totaling over $900 billion annually. So on December 12th, we asked the government to release all the economic documents and analyses that show specifically how this new deal will affect our economy, but they refused. Canadians deserve to know all the upsides and downsides of this deal before we agree to sign it. Will the government immediately provide all of the new NAFTA-related economic reviews and analyses, both informal and formal?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Global Affairs Canada's chief economist is currently preparing an analysis based on the December amendments to the deal, which, in my view and in the view of our professional negotiating team, improve the deal for Canadians. We absolutely intend to publish the analysis once it is finalized, which will be soon. I invite all of us as colleagues to put Canada and Canadians first and to ratify the new NAFTA without undue delay.
Member for Prince Albert.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate finally receiving a briefing today from the government on the new NAFTA, 48 days after we asked questions regarding it. For a government that wants to move quickly on this file, taking a month and a half to respond simply is not good enough. We have to do our due diligence. When will this government recognize the fact they are a minority government and start working with us?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me begin by thanking my colleague from Prince Albert for his ongoing collaboration and collaboration over many years. We absolutely are very open to sharing and making available our officials to all members of the opposition. Immediately after the signing of the protocol of amendments to the new NAFTA, Steve Verheuel offered briefings in December to the leaders of all of the opposition parties with the members of their caucus who they chose to invite, and I spoke last week with the member from Prince Albert.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, aluminum is one of the main three economic drivers in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean area. They produce a third of Canada's aluminum. Our region will be hardest hit by the new NAFTA. And I reached out to the government with some concrete, constructive solutions. Does the government intend to work with us, Conservatives, to promote the aluminum sector? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Yes, absolutely. As I already answered the Bloc, we are totally open to constructive proposals from our colleagues opposite. When it comes to aluminum, I'd like to underscore the fact that when the new NAFTA is ratified, 70% of the content in North American cars must be produced in North America. Today, it's 0%, and I think that 70% is a whole lot better than zero.
Ottawa South.
Mr. Speaker, on January 22nd, it was a historic day for all Franco-Ontarians. It was announced that the Université de l'Ontario Français got the green light thanks to this government's leadership supporting Franco-Ontarians who mobilized to get their own French language university. At long last, can the Minister for Official Languages tell us more? The Minister for Official Languages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a Franco-Ontarian yourself, you must be celebrating together with us. I'd like to thank my colleague for Ottawa South for his leadership. This historic agreement paves the way for the first ever French language university in Ontario, run by and for Ontario's Francophones. UOF will become a reality thanks to all Franco-Ontarians and their supporters who condemned the Ford government's cuts in 2018. So we will always be on side with Francophones to defend the French fact.
Government documents showed that the Liberal finance minister tried to fudge the government's balance sheet by reclassifying the $256 million gift to the China-controlled Asian Infrastructure Bank from a provision expense to an investment. If a private corporation did this, it would be criminal fraud. Wow. This same bank is building 3 energy pipelines in Asia and is furthering China's foreign policy interests. Will the minister come clean about the other budget trickery the Liberals are now using to hide how big the deficit really is?
Wow. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Speaker, 2 things. First of all, we've been very clear since day one, since the very first day in office, that we want to make investments in Canadians. We want to make investments in middle-class Canadians. We want to make investments in infrastructure. We know that this can advance our economy, can also help Canadians. With respect to the Asian Infrastructure Bank, what we've said is that we want to support multilateral development banks. We know that they help the global economy grow, and by helping the global economy, of course, they help Canadian firms and Canadians to have a better future. Thank you.
The member for Brantford-Brant.
Mr. Speaker, CTV, Global News, and the Toronto Star have all reported that 40,000 veterans are trapped in a benefits backlog boondoggle of this government's own making. Yesterday, I asked the minister, how many veterans are currently waiting longer than the 16-week standard for a decision on their benefits? He didn't answer. So I'll ask again. How many veterans are currently waiting longer than the 16-week standard for a decision on their benefits?
The Honourable Minister for Veterans Affairs.
I said yesterday, I wish my honourable colleague, when he was in his government, would have not fired the 1,000 people that we needed so badly in Veterans Affairs. But we have picked up the problem, and we're going to solve the problem.
The Honourable Member for Brantford-Brant would like to hear his answer. I'm sure we don't want to interrupt the Honourable Minister from giving him an answer.
Let's have an answer.
I'll let him answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I will tell my honourable colleague that, yes, we understood the problem. That's why we invested $10 billion over 6 years in Veterans Affairs. That's why we're revamping the system so that we will be able to deal with the backlog that exists in Veterans Affairs, which is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. But it's important to note, too, that first applications have about doubled, and we have hired 700 new people. We will solve the problem.
The Honourable Member for Barrie Springwater, Oro Medonte.
Mr. Speaker, Lake Simcoe is the jewel of Central Ontario. It contributes to the great quality of life for those who live nearby. On October 9, 2019, the Deputy Prime Minister visited Barrie and promised that a re-elected Liberal government would reinstate funding for the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund. Will the Deputy Prime Minister tell us when she will be making good on her commitment and reinstating the $40 million to the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has committed significant funds to the Great Lakes and other freshwater initiatives to address a number of the issues, such as the ones that are referred to by the Honourable Member. We committed during the campaign to put in place a new a Canada Water Agency that will look to prioritize the issues that are of greatest regional significance and to focus resources on those. So stay tuned.
It's exciting.
The Honourable Member for Glengarry, Prescott Russell.
Mr. Speaker, last week I attended the conference of the Rural Ontario Municipal Association in Toronto. The conference gives municipal leaders a chance to discuss key issues affecting rural Ontarians, especially after years of conservative neglect, and the importance of having a good partnership with Ottawa to make life more affordable for rural communities, regardless of where they live. Can the Minister of Rural Economic Development tell the House what investments this government is making to target rural areas? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, unprecedented investments by our government in rural regions are bearing fruit. Since 2015, we have connected 400,000 rural homes to high-speed internet. From coast to coast, we are investing in ports, highways, and communities to create jobs. Investing in rural regions benefits all Canadians. The Honourable Member.
Timmins, James Bay.
Speaker, 4 years since this government was found guilty of systemic discrimination against First Nation children. This Prime Minister, 7 non-compliance orders, millions spent on lawyers, going to federal court to try and quash the ruling, and now he's blown off tomorrow's deadline for negotiating while refusing to support the class action that he said he was going to support. This Prime Minister has built his political reputation fighting the most vulnerable children in this country, and kids have died. So when is he going to call off his lawyer, sit down with Cindy Blackstock and negotiate a just solution for all these children and their families? When is he going to do it?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, our commitment to compensate First Nations children harmed by past Child and Family Services policy is firm, and it remains firm. Canada's named senior officials, and those discussions are ongoing from my department and the Department of Justice to conduct discussions which are, as I mentioned, are ongoing and will be kept on a strictly confidential basis to build trust between the parties, which heretofore has not been the case. No party will be speaking publicly about this because we want to make progress specifically focused on children who have been harmed by past policies. The CHRT has asked our parties to sit down and determine what the compensation process might look like, and that's exactly what we're going to do, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver-Grenville.
Canada's correctional investigator recently said the indigenization of Canada's prison population is nothing short of a national travesty. I agree, the TRC and calls for justice also agree. More action is required to address the over-incarceration of Indigenous, Black, and other marginalized Canadians. Evidence clearly shows that mandatory minimum penalties are a big part of the problem and is not smart justice policy. There's been enough study and too much delay due to political expediency. Can the government please confirm that it will repeal mandatory minimum penalties for all but the most serious of crimes?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for her question. Our government is committed to advancing sentencing reform that will stand the test of time. This means continuing to work with our provincial and territorial partners, with leaders from Indigenous communities, and all actors in the criminal justice system, as well as taking advice from our courts and listening to Canadians. We're committed to achieving a modern and efficient criminal justice system that addresses the tragic problem of overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples and marginalized Canadians while holding offenders to account and protecting victims.
And that's all the questions and answers for today. The Honourable Government Whip has a motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There have been discussions among the parties, and I think if you seek it, you will find consent for the following motion. That notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House, on Wednesday, January 29, 2020, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions, the House shall proceed to the consideration of Ways and Means Motion Number 2.
The Honourable, does he have the unanimous consent of the House to move his motion?
In terms of the motion, is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Carried. The Honourable Opposition Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe if you seek it, you'll find consent for the following motion. Qu'à la conclusion du débat
that at the conclusion of debate on the opposition motion today, that any questions necessary to dispose of the motion should be voted on, a recorded vote to be deemed requested or deferred until Wednesday, January 29th, 2020, immediately after the consideration of Ways and Means Motion Number 2. The Honourable Member, does he have the unanimous consent of the House to propose the motion? Okay, agreed. We have heard the motion. Does it please the House to